gosh,
Morning, Miss Sonia.
morning, Miss Cheryl. I'm late for work.
I noticed the other day y'all had a big campaign with them police officers, so shutting down them people barbecue, wedding, dance. Man, how y'all expect these people to make money and survive?
Oh, Miss Cheryl, that is far from the truth. The EPA and the Guyana Police Force are actually working together to ensure that persons who conduct certain businesses and activities are authorized. We've tried to allow them to adhere to the noise regulations.
Well, this gotta be a new law. What law is this?
These laws were always in place. It's now that we're getting all these complaints at the agency, we are trying to enforce them. The Environmental Protection Act has been in place since 1996, and it states that persons and businesses must apply for environmental authorization before operating a sound-making device.
Well, girl, I never know this thing is prior to the law.
So if you're keeping a barbecue or an open-air function, like a wedding or a concert, especially in your community, right, and you're playing a music system, you have to apply for a short-term noise permit. And for persons that operate in a business and you got generators and stuff, you have to apply for a long-term permit. And that is applicable to bars and hotspots and clubs also.
Well, now that you explain it, I understand it. It's unfair to the elderly, sick people, and even them little children.
That is correct. According to the World Health Organization, loud noise can cause stress, sleep deprivation, and hearing impairment. And I'm sure you wouldn't want that.
Oh, now I understand. Thank you for explaining it, Miss Sonia.
For more information, you can contact the EPA at 225-5471 or visit our office at Ganges Street, North Sophia, Georgetown.
Hello Guyana, and welcome to another episode of The Environment Matters. I am your moderator, Ladonna Kissoon. I do trust that you're all keeping safe in this global pandemic. Please do remember that this too shall pass. So on our last episode, we were talking about solid waste management practices. And at this time, I'd like to just remind you that the International Coastal Cleanup has been rescheduled to November 2020. So continue to follow us on social media for more updates and information. So for this episode, we will be talking to two of my colleagues, Fernandes and Mr. Vidyanand Mohabir. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you
Okay. I'm still not accustomed calling him by his right name, just to let you guys know right off the bat. So we'll be talking to them today, and we'll be talking about something that is not regularly talked about, and that is multilateral environmental agreements. So I'll ask both Diane and Vidyanand to introduce themselves to us. So Diane.
Hi, good morning everyone. Diana Fernandes. I'm the Multilateral Environmental Agreements Coordinator at the Department of Environment.
Hi, good morning everyone. My name is Vidyanand Mohabir. I'm a Senior Environmental Officer within the MEAs unit, the Multilateral Environmental Agreements unit at EPA.
Great. So like I said, we'll be discussing a topic that is not regularly talked about, and those are multilateral environmental agreements. And I know everybody, just like myself, when I first heard about it, you want to know exactly what does a multilateral environmental agreement mean. So could you both share what is your thought or perspective on what MEAs for short, what it actually is? So we can start with that.
Okay, sure. Yes, I do agree. It's not something you hear about often, and really and truly, it's a main instrument that international instrument that you use to bring countries together to deal with global environmental matters, and it looks at environmental issues from biodiversity loss, pollution, marine litter, climate change, land degradation.
Okay.
So if I could just follow up on my colleague here, the way how I approached it, MEA is multilateral, meaning more than one. It's not just unilateral, it's more than one. Agreements, which it speaks for itself, is just an agreement, and, well, of course, environmental agreement. And like my colleague mentioned, It's an instrument that is used globally. So when we think of environmental problems, it's not just one country facing it. It's more than one country. It's a whole region, and sometimes even extend to the whole world. If I could just give an example, climate change is not just our problem; it's everybody's problem. And a way to approach this, that is how we come up with the concept of MEAs, that everyone agrees to this agreement, and they have their role to play to combat this problem.
Great. I'm actually happy that you've mentioned that, when you think multilateral, you think more than one. Because I know some people might be thinking, so what's the difference between the multilateral environmental agreements and bilateral agreements? So would you mind just clearing that up for us?
So it's on the same vein, multilateral meaning more than one, bilateral, bi meaning two. In terms of environmental agreement, it's not such a common theme like MEAs. Bilateral agreements would most likely, you would probably refer it to or associate it with like trade deals or country to country. For instance, like the Guyana-Norway agreement, you could say that is a bilateral agreement because it's with Guyana and another country. If it were more than two countries, then it would have evolved into like a multilateral agreement.
Great. So why are these agreements important, and not just important to the world at large, like you mentioned with the climate change, but more so important to Guyana?
Well,
We can
just
start.
continue.
We'll start.
Yeah, well, I'll just take it. Yeah, so why is it important? Okay, I just mentioned that it's an instrument that is used to combat or to basically find a solution to like a global problem. So it being this instrument where more than one countries sign on to, there's the whole process where countries sign on to, and with signing on, they have special obligations that they're supposed to like implement or try their best to do their part. So the importance of it, it's very critical in that the whole function of the MEAs. It's very hard to combat a global problem when some countries are pulling their weight and some aren't. But in that, the MEAs, they also recognize that some countries are not in a position to do that. So there are all these considerations going into an MEA. So the importance, if we're going to look at, for instance, Guyana, I keep going back to climate change because that is the only MEA that comes to my mind. The importance of it being that we have to do policy changes, we have to come up with laws and regulations, and of course, this impact the country, the people, and how they operate, and also how their lifestyle is going to be. So in that sense, it's a very critical aspect, and also it could have more importance on the economy of that country. So it's very wide in terms of the importance, but that's just one aspect of it.
Okay, Dan, do you have anything to add?
Well, that was a mouthful there, Vidyanand, it doesn't leave much room for me to add, but I guess to try and add to Richie's summary about, the benefit, when you look at an MEA, and as Richie pointed out, more than one countries, what is important to note as well, MEAs set non-binding obligations as well as binding obligations. So I think that when you look at Guyana, for example, when you sign on to an MEA, it gives you a voice in the international arena to speak on environmental issues. And when you look at the environmental issues, it's global, but when you look at the national level, it's issues that we're facing nationally as well. And signing on to some of these agreements also provides us with support, both financial and technical support, to be able to meet these obligations. And we sign on because we want, as a country, you sign on because you want to see a change, and you want to get those developed countries that are considered the ones, major polluters. You speak as one voice when you look at small island developing states, for example.
Okay, great. All right, so there you have it. A little bit about what MEAs are, and more so how they benefit the world at large and Guyana. So, one of the things I want to know, or I'm sure our listeners wants to know, is what are some of the MEAs that Guyana would have agreed or signed on to? I know when I first got into the field, I was really surprised at a lot of the partnerships that Guyana has with places like the UN and EU. So it's really shocking to know that there are all these things in place, for us as a nation, for us as a people. So what are some of the multilateral environmental agreements that Guyana would have signed on to?
So, if I may, Vidyanand. um, so so there's a lot, and I think what we missed at first when we were speaking about MEAs is that they can be both global and regional. So you have MEAs that spans the Caribbean region, Latin America and the Caribbean, and then you have the EU, as well, the African region, and Guyana has signed on to 26 MEAs in total. We're still right now there is negotiation going on to sign on to this sub-agreement under the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, and right now we're working to develop to get this agreement that's looking at biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. And when it comes, if it's an agreement that is agreed globally and it's open for signature, more than likely Guyana will be one of the states that signs on to it because we are party to UNCLOS, United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea. And there are others, but for now we have 26 that we've signed on to, ranging from the United Nations Convention on land degradation, the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. I think most persons might be familiar with that one. There is the most recent one we signed on to is the ESCAZU agreement, and that's a regional agreement looking at the sharing of environmental data and public participation and access to environmental justice. Then you have MEAs dealing with chemicals and waste, looking at the Basel Convention that deals with the transboundary movement of hazardous waste and its disposal. Stockholm Convention on persistent organic pollutants, just to name a few. And climate change has several agreements that we signed on to other than the UNFCCC.
Okay, great. Anything to add?
Yeah, so this is just going a bit on the mechanism, not too much, but like Diana mentioned, we are party or signatory to 26 MEAs, and there are certain agencies that are dedicated as national focal points or national focal agencies. So for each of these MEAs, there is a national agency that is responsible or carry the responsibility of being the national focal point. Since I'm from EPA, I could speak directly to the UN CBD, the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. We are the national focal point for that convention. And also under that convention, there are two protocols. So you have convention and then you have protocols. These are like sub-conventions. And the EPA also is the focal point for those two agreements.
Okay, I'm glad that you mentioned that. So how is it that, how is it that Guyana, not just the EPA, but how did Guyana become the focal point for some of these MEAs?
So it's not Guyana becoming the focal point, it's the agencies that are the focal points.
Okay.
So Guyana, we are signatory to these conventions, these agreements, but within Guyana, the first obligation is to identify the national focal point. And this is done by a whole process. So there is this convention. If you want to be part of it, you have to go through different process. I can say that Diana mentioned it briefly here. They're a group of parties that have an issue. They come up with some sort of concept, and it's open for signatures. So when it's open for signatures, countries who are interested, they can make their signature. It's done through the mechanism, of course. And when they have certain amount of signatures, then the actual formation of the MEA starts. And then you can either continue, like if you want to be like a full-fledged or actually maintain this interest, you could ratify the convention. So again, that needs a certain amount of countries where that are ratifying members. But if after the convention has been ratified and you still want to be part of it, you then accede to these conventions.
Okay.
So there are several ways, because of course some conventions are already existing, and you cannot be a ratifying member because you weren't there from the beginning, so you accede after there.
Okay. Well, thank you.
So
Go ahead, Dan.
just to add what Richie was referring to in terms of how we select focal points, and I think what is important to note is that, and we could use EPA for example, is that you select focal point with the responsibility of coordinating the implementation of these MEAs, and you select based on the process that they have to go through, but based on their mandate and their responsibility. You know, if you look at EPA, for example, EPA has a responsibility for environmental management, but it also has been working for several years on biodiversity issues. So it was designated, at the time, the only existing agency that could have been designated the focal point for biodiversity, the Convention on Biological Diversity. And when you look at focal points, is that the focal point itself may not implement all the obligations under convention, because the obligations may spread across several agencies when you look at what the obligations are, what you're required to do. So like EPA, for example, works with several agencies in order for Guyana to meet its obligation under the UN CBD, for example. And it consists of government agencies, indigenous groups, other NGOs, women group. Yeah, it's the private sector. So it's implementation happens on a spectrum. So it's not EPA alone that that does the implementation. It coordinates, and it happens in a way that you have full stakeholder, or it should happen in a way that you have full stakeholder engagement and participation.
Okay, great. Thank you. So that was indeed a mouthful. And, just to clear up a little, well, not to clear, but to reflect a little bit on what both Dan and Vidyanand were saying. So with regards to focal points, it's really who is somewhat in charge of executing the mandate of the agreement, or to just ensure that what we signed on to is actually done.
Well,
Correct?
Diana explained it there.
Yes,
So it's
there you go.
mainly a coordination role, and
Okay.
it's spread across.
Yeah.
Great. So, just like myself, I'm sure all our listeners are pretty much wondering, okay, so we signed on to all these agreements for the benefit of Guyana. But more so, how does these agreement benefit the people of Guyana?
Okay, it benefits the people in not directly, but in a sort of they can enjoy the outcome from the implementation, successful implementation of the convention. For instance, you could sign on to a convention. Let's use the Minamata Convention when they're looking to phase out the use of mercury in the mining industry. People, the miners there, they interact with mercury on a daily basis, and we all know the effects of mercury on the human body. So let's just use that as an example. The obligation under this convention is to basically find ways to phase out the use of mercury and to replace it with a better alternative to it. And that directly, you could see how the miners would benefit from that, in that it would somewhat alleviate the conditions they're working in, and also the effects that they're currently facing with mercury. So ultimately, the benefits, it triggers down to the people, because these are environmental agreements. First, you take care of the environment. When you take care of the environment, then the people, the system, the ecosystem services, the benefits, they're not for the environment, but they're ultimately they're for us. So if you look at that way, you could see how the people ultimately benefits from these agreements.
Most definitely. Dan, do you have anything to
Again, that was a mouthful, Vidyanand, you know.
Everything's a
But no, he's absolutely right. You know, it's hard to see the direct benefits for the people, for you and I. But by you sign on to these agreements and you're telling yourself that you have these issues nationally. Now, how are we going to address these issues? You know, maybe we can do it on our own. Maybe we cannot. So most times you depend on collaboration among different countries, and you get support to deal with whatever environmental issue you want to tackle. So if you look for example, our standing forests, you know, we're signatory, we're party to UNFCCC, the Climate Change Convention, the Land Degradation Convention, the Biodiversity Convention, and by protecting our standing forests, you know, you're meeting your specified obligations. And if you look closely at UNCBD, and we've set up protected areas, is that you're trying to manage your ecosystem and protect your ecosystem services, which, as Richie explained, in the long run is beneficial for us. You know, the more standing forests we have, it's not just going to impact globally, but for us, clean air. If you go further down, when you look at the people, there are opportunities for you to play a part, for I to play a part in looking at livelihood activities that can actually help to alleviate environmental problems.
Great. All right. So with all these agreements, with what Guyana is benefiting from it and what we are indirectly benefiting from it as a people, I know from time to time these agreements have small projects. Now, DOE, Department of Environment, and the EPA, I know from time to time execute projects. So would you mind telling us what would have been some of the projects that were executed under these agreements, and what are some of the projects that are to be executed under some of these agreements? I know that you would have also mentioned like the Basel Convention and things like that. So would you mind sharing with us some of the projects that would have taken place prior to our conversation now, and what is that we could expect further down?
So, I guess
we'll hear from DOE first. Yes, let's hear from DOE.
The Department of Environment. So the department is relatively new. You know, it's not like the EPA. That is a bit older. No offense there, Richie.
It's okay.
From our experience.
You got me there. So the one project that we're currently implementing actually relates to the Rio Convention, and these conventions are the Climate Change Convention, the Land Degradation Convention, and the Biodiversity Convention. And what this project hopes to do is actually to help create synergies among these three conventions in terms of implementing the conventions, as well as being able to report on our obligations. And I think what is important for our viewers to note is that it's their 26 agreements that we signed on to, and their projects spread across those 26 MEAs. For us right now is just, as Richie will tell you in a few, the Biodiversity Convention and the Basel Convention projects that they've been doing. For us, it's been the Rio project, and we're looking to actually strengthen our implementation abilities. Because what you find is that we lack the technical capacities in most cases to actually fully implement these conventions, and this project is hoping to strengthen that. What it's also hoping to do is to set up what we're calling the EIMMS, which is the Environmental Information Management and Monitoring System.
Okay, so just to pause, just go that again for us. It's the
I lost my train of thought there. I guess you moderate, Madam Moderator. The EIMMS, okay, which stands for the Environment Information Management and Monitoring System. Okay. And what we're hoping to do with that system is to actually start collating environmental data across the environmental sectors and being able to turn that data into information, being able to have policy-driven, data-driven policy decision making, so that the policies that are set is based on facts, it's based on data and not pulled out of a hat, sort of speak. But yeah, so that's what we're trying to do with the Rio project, and we've had a lot of capacity building activities, and not just with government agencies. We've had information and awareness sessions in communities. Right now we had to put a hold on that because of COVID, but we've had sessions with schools. We were looking at the educational component of environmental agreements, and we're also looking to work with the local organs as well, in trying to get everybody involved and starting to get meeting the obligations that we have to.
Great. The reason why I asked you to repeat it is because I've been hearing a little bit about, the system being put in place where all environmental agencies will be able to have a central database that the information is there and you can access it. Because, at the EPA, we get a lot of calls from UG students asking about data and data across the board. So it's something that I'm sure not only myself, but other persons are looking forward to. So thank you, Diane. So Richie, tell us a little bit about what EPA has been doing with regards to projects related to MEAs.
Okay, so the EPA, like Diana mentioned, which I disagree is old, but
Most experienced.
We're most
Thank you.
experienced,
Most
yes.
experienced,
There you
I'm sorry.
go.
Most
There you go. We're not
experienced,
old,
yes.
we're just more
More
experienced.
so if I could just backtrack a bit on where these projects come from or how we even reached a project. So I was alluding to it earlier when I was speaking to the MEAs, the formation of it, and how they get their funding. When the when the MEAs are being developed, especially I could speak to the UNCVD. It is part of the Rio Convention. The Rio Convention, this happened way back in 1992. It was known as the first Earth Summit. And out of this Earth Summit, we ended up with the three main conventions, which is the land degradation, the biodiversity, and the climate change. And within that mechanism, it was agreed that a funding body should be set up to help the implementation of these conventions. So this funding body is a special funding body. It's known as Jeff. No, it's not a person. I thought it was a person, but it's not. Because I just keep hearing Jeff, Jeff, and I was wondering who the hell is Jeff. But it's actually the Global Environment Facility. This facility has been specifically set up to fund the implementation of the Rio Convention then, and now it has kind of expanded its mandate. So how it happens is that if we're a signatory to a convention, there is funding made available to us via Jeff, and there are other different funding agencies as well. But our main funder so far has been Jeff in our experience. So that is how we access funding, and when there's funding, the country decides on what our needs are, and they kind of come up with a project concept. This project concept it goes to consultation, and then it's forwarded to the Jeff, and they basically give the final approval. Okay, hey, this is something that is within our mandate. We need this. We as it is right now, we qualify for funding to further the implementation of this specific work on that specific convention. If I go more specifically for the EPA, I can speak on the Nagoya Protocol. So this is one of the protocol under the CBD. This has to do with access and benefit sharing, ABS for short. So basically what this is that the convention the agreement requires Guyana to have free and fair access to our genetic resources. Genetic resources being our plants, animals, bacteria, whatever, any living thing is considered our genetic resources. So we must have free and fair access to our genetic resources, and also the benefits, if there are any benefits coming out from the utilization of these resources, it should be equitably shared. So far, we have benefited from several projects specifically for ABS. What we have done so far is that we were able to develop regulations, which is another obligation. We're supposed to have regulations and policies to facilitate the free and fair, transparent access and also the equitable sharing of benefits. So we were able to develop regulations, we were able to do consultations, and also public awareness. When it comes to ABS here in Guyana, it's a bit more tricky because we have indigenous groups, and also Guyana is somewhat ahead in that we actually have the Amerindian Act, which legally gives the Amerindians rights to their communities. So in that way, it's kind of like easier for us because they have exclusive rights. So before any access is granted, they have to get permission from each village, the Tushao, and then permission from the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs. So we did consultation with them. We were able to come up with a template, a contract. So before researchers go into these communities, there's a template that is available to them with all the conditions that the researcher has to agree to, and this is to protect their resources they have and also any traditional knowledge that is associated with that resource. For example, traditional medicine that is associated with this particular fruit, that is their knowledge. If a researcher is to come in, they have to get their permission and they have to agree to the terms that the people set, the village set before they could enter into that village. So that is one of the projects we were working on. It came to an end, but more or less there will be more projects to kind of further this and actually see the regulations enacted.
Great.
So that is just one. I would love to go on for more, but time does
That
not.
was that was a lot there. That was a lot there, Vidyanand. But I guess before we go to the next question, just to add, with the Global Environment Facility, it funds 5 of these MEAs. So the 3 that Richie would have mentioned, and it provides funding for the Minamata Convention and the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants. And what I guess just to add as well, as Richie would have indicated, when you sign on to an MEA, you have specific obligations, and 3 things that most times stick out is you have to have the focal point set up, you have to have the institutional arrangement as well set up, because a focal point can be a person, not necessarily an institution, and you have to have the legislative and policy in order for you to implement the obligations under that convention.
Okay, great. All right, so my next question is actually in 2 folds. So the first one is actually for Richie. You made mention of accessing funding from Jeff. Could you just tell us, it might be a rigorous process. I'm guessing it's a rigorous process to actually get funding from Jeff. But just in a nutshell, how exactly it is that we go about getting that funding? And Diana, with regards to funding, is Guyana itself involved in providing funding for these MEAs? Because like we initially started the conversation off by saying MEAs are multilateral. So there is more than one persons or parties involved. So we'll start with Vidyanand.
Yeah, so I think we mentioned this, but as a party, we're required to make contributions to the convention. So that is one, I don't know what you want to call it, but the convention, they have their own fund as well. So when you contribute, each country contribute, they have their fund to do their own activities as well. Moving on to Jeff and how we access funds. I know that Jeff, they have different cycles. So currently I know we're on the Jeff 7 cycle, and they have this program called STAR. I'm not sure if you could help me with the meaning of STAR there. It's strategic
Transparent
allocation of
resources.
resources. So it's a lot of
Yeah, I think
acronyms.
I think we would have loved if we switched the questions because.
Well, that's fine. So if you feel.
Well, I was gonna ask Vidyanand if he would prefer to switch the questions because.
I defer.
There you go.
So the reason why is because I've been dealing with Jeff for a while, you know, since starting out at the EPA and the DOE. But yes, as Richie said, the Jeff has cycles, and we're in the 7th cycle, and each country that is considered eligible for Jeff funding, I think it's over 163 countries that are eligible for Jeff funding every 4 years. So the cycles are every 4 year. So we're given allocated a specific amount for the 4 years, and in a nutshell, how they estimate how much we'll get is based on your GDP, your rate of implementation, and some other thing that I can't remember off the top of my head. But it's like a mathematical calculation they do to determine what you will get. So like for example, we're in the 7th cycle and we were allocated 4 point something million US. And this is spread across 3 focal areas, which is, again, the 3 Rio Convention, climate change, land degradation, and biodiversity. And we, as a country, now, we're allocated that funding, and we now will decide how we will invest that money nationally. But as well, it has to align. So Jeff has a criteria. So every cycle has a funding strategic plan on how, or a criteria on how your projects are going to align, or it has to align to their priorities. And we've decided to, in the past, I guess if I step back a little bit, in the past, how we've done implementation with our Jeff allocation or Jeff Star allocation is that biodiversity EPA would take their allocation and they would decide what they're going to do with that. So whether they wanted to do a project looking at mainstreaming biodiversity into the mining sector, which is a project they actually did, right? UNFCCC, which is OCC, which is the focal Office of Climate Change, is the focal point for the Climate Change Convention. They will decide how they will spend their allocation. And the same will go for the Guyana Lands and Surveys Commission, which is the focal point for the Land Degradation Convention. And that's most times been our approach. And we've had, I guess, some examples of having it integrated and how you actually use the funding. But for the 7th cycle, we wanted to try something different because we realized it's like we were in silos. So it's like EPA is doing their implementation and the others are doing their implementation, and you're still not seeing the change you want to. And even in the 7th cycle, the Jeff wanted to see what they say. They wanted a bigger bang for their buck. So they developed these things called impact programs, and looking at sustainable cities, looking at sustainable forest management. And the trick is that they were giving you an incentive. So if you invest in one of their impact programs, they will add on to your total amount that you have. So I think it was a 1-to-1. So every dollar you invest, the Jeff will give you back, or 2-to-1. Every $2 you invest, the Jeff will give you back $1. So we had consultations with climate change, with lands and survey, and with other agencies that are involved in, to some extent, implementation of these conventions. I mean, we all agreed we needed to go for the incentive because it's more resources that will be allocated, and you'll be able to do a project that will have a bigger impact. And we've done that. So we've developed a concept. It was approved. We went on to the next stage of, it's a rigorous process. So, you know, it's like you develop the concept is approved, and you move on to what they call a PIF, a project identification form. It's sort of like a proposal, expanding on what you have in the concept. And then if that is approved, that is submitted to Jeff again, and if that is approved, You move on to preparing the full project document that is going to detail all the activities that you will do, all your expected outcomes, all your stakeholders that you're going to involve as part of the project. And once that is approved, you're allocated the resources to start implementation. And when you start implementation, you have to select an agency at the national level to lead that implementation.
Okay.
And you also have to have a Jeff agency that oversees that implementation, just to make sure that because Jeff has policies in place to make sure that the project is implemented fairly, transparently. So, they have their gender policies, ensuring that you're gender inclusive. They have their safeguards, looking at indigenous people. So they're very, they set up all these criteria to make sure that, your project meets all these standards. So it's like the Jeff agency oversees, the lead agency oversees the implementation of these projects. And in most cases for us, the United Nations Development Program, which is UNDP, which has an office here, has been one of our major Jeff agency that we've worked with on implementing most of our projects. For Jeff 7, we're looking to use WWF, which is another agency of the Jeff.
Okay. Well, that indeed was a lot
Well,
of information to take.
I hope I covered the question, but you let me know if I missed anything.
That's right. So yes, that was indeed a lot of information to process, but thank you so much for sharing. You did make mention, but just for clarity, do NGOs, would they be provided with funding through MEA or through Jeff for projects that are related to MEAs?
So NGOs are one of our major stakeholders in implementing, not ours, I guess globally when you look at how implementation happens, NGOs and other civil society organizations are very important when you look at implementation, because they can also do some of the things we at the national level are unable to. They can more reach their people, for example, than we can. There is funding available for civil society organizations, yes. They have there's program set up on the Jeff called the Small Grants Program, and that provides funding to NGOs and community-based organizations to actually develop projects that's going to enhance their livelihood. So livelihood projects, if you want to look at, for example, climate smart agriculture in your community, or you're looking at different manufacturing, but at the same time you're looking at, I don't know if this is a term, green manufacturing, but looking at your electricity consumption, your water consumption, and once you develop the proposal, it has to align with the Jeff, of course, to ensure that okay, this project will contribute to a livelihood, yes, but at the same time you have environmental benefits at that level.
Great. So there is opportunity there. All right. So on that note, we'll take a quick break and we will be right back.
At the Environmental Protection Agency, we believe that the environment is everybody's business. We can start caring for our planet by becoming more environmentally friendly in our everyday actions. Here's what you can do. Dispose of waste in a garbage bin. Clean our drains, yards, and carpets regularly. Take a reusable shopping bag to the market. Support local butchers and farmers to reduce packaged waste. Plant a kitchen garden, trees, and flowers. Compost your organic waste. Conserve water and electricity. Carry a reusable water bottle. These little acts are good for your health and that of the environment. Remember, healthy people work better and achieve more, and together, small actions make a big difference. For further information on how you can help, please contact the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, Ganges Street, Sophia, or telephone us at 225-5467. You can also visit our website, epaguyana.org, or our Facebook and Instagram pages.
Are you involved in a business or thinking about starting one? Do you know there may be environmental impacts from business activities? According to the Environmental Protection Act of 1996, businesses such as gas stations, rice mills, large-scale agriculture and poultry farms, large-scale mining and forestry operations, hotels, and resorts must be authorized. Persons proposing any of these activities need to submit an application for environmental authorization to the EPA.
Okay, welcome back to the Environment Matters. Again, I'm your moderator, Ladonna Kissoon, and chatting with me so far today, we have Ms. Diane Fernandes, who is from the Department of Environment, and she is the Multilateral Environmental Agreements Coordinator. And my other colleague, Mr. Vidyanand Mohabir, who is a Senior Environmental Officer at the Environmental Protection Agency, and he is also a part of the Multilateral Environmental Agreements Unit at the EPA. That was a whole lot to say. So today we've been chatting about multilateral environmental agreements, and so far we basically have an understanding of what they are, how they benefit Guyana, how they benefit Guyanese at large, and more so, you know, what they're really all about, the gist of it, and how more so these agreements not only benefit us but also gives us protection to some extent. So what I do want to jump back in with is a question that has over the last year or so I have noticed a really big change. So do you believe that, you know, because of public knowledge and people's consciousness of environmental issues or environmental related issues, that you would have seen a growth in a lot of the projects or a lot of the participation that projects having to do with MEAs are concerned?
Is that like a yes or no? Like yes.
Yeah, yes, no, you've seen a change, you've not seen a change, you're not too sure.
So I guess I yes, that is most definitely a yes. Even when you look, if you go back in time and the whole issue with the environment and environmental protection started back in 1992, looking at Rachel Carson and the whole issue with pesticides.
Mm-hmm.
Stemming from that, where we are today, there's a lot more, people are a lot more aware of what's going on globally, what's going on at the national level. I mean, you're seeing it. If you look at us, for example, we're part of the Amazon region, and you know, we all saw what happened to the Amazon forest and or what's been going on with that. So I think yes, the people are much more aware, and you have a lot more NGOs, environmental NGOs, that are also sharing awareness and actually doing research and getting the policymakers, getting the heads of state to listen, and I think also a lot more integration, looking at if you damage the environment, it's going to affect you economically, and no states wants that. So I think they're seeing that we need the three pillars to balance.
To balance it, definitely. All right. So in wrapping up, what I would like for both of you to tell me is, what do you see happening with MEAs in the next 5-10 years along the line, and what are some of your major achievements thus far? Maybe we could talk about achievements with regards
Ladonna,
to
these
EPA.
loaded questions. But just to start.
Let's just scratch the surface then, yes.
Yeah, so actually we're coming upon the sunset of a global biodiversity framework, which lasted from 2011 to 2022. And that framework included the Aichi biodiversity targets and also some of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Currently, right now, in the global sphere on biodiversity, we're developing this new framework, which is known as the post-2020 biodiversity framework, and this goes for another 10 years, and then thereafter. So, what we recognize, and this is just globally, during the last framework, most countries unfortunately were not able to achieve the goals set out under that framework. And this is very evident. There were several reports released. I mean, if you look at the Global Biodiversity Assessment, the global report that was done under the IPBES Convention, this is another convention, and the report was released sometime last year, and it forecasted that countries aren't up to the challenge. They haven't dedicated as much as they should have. And this time around, we are trying to double on those efforts. Countries are encouraged to take transformative change action to move this framework forward because, quite frankly, our survival depends on it. We keep losing species. Global temperatures have been rising, and also with the protection of our wildlife, and no more so than the current pandemic we have. More has to be done, or else more and more of these problems will become commonplace. So you see the urgent need for action like coming in this new post-2020 framework. And I have to stress that it's not okay anymore just to say we did this on biodiversity, we did that on biodiversity, but actually commit to it. Countries have been committing. For instance, there are talks of even countries committing 1% of their gross domestic product towards biodiversity convention. These are the actions that are needed moving forward. So right now it's a very pivotal point. After this post-2020 framework, we wouldn't have a wiggle room to work with. Those days are long gone and they're behind us. So now it's time for urgent action.
Okay, thank you.
Wow,
So-
Vidyanand, we weren't supposed to scare.
That was a
we weren't
plea. Yes, it was a plea.
Supposed to
A plea to
scare
do
the
better.
viewers there.
So Diane, could you share with us what do you see happening with MEAs for years to come? What is the vision of, more so not just with the EPA, but DOE and Guyana?
So, I mean, I'm not going to tell this out to you like Vidyanand did. I mean, I understand why he did, right? Because, we see it every day. You're part of all these conferences and webinars, and you're seeing the evidence. I mean, we're not seeing it to the extent here. If you look at most of our forests are intact, our land degradation is not as severe as in other countries. However, but we depend on other countries too. So whatever happens globally will eventually affect us at the national level. I mean, we've taken steps as best as we can, to protect and to conserve our biodiversity. Given that we've set up our Protected Areas Commission, we've established protected areas. So I think we've been doing our part, but we still need to do more. Looking at the question at hand, going back to MEAs, it is the goal of the Department of Environment to set up a Multilateral Environmental Agreements Committee. I mean, we've done that, and the reason for that is that we keep realizing that when you look at these MEAs, they're all cross-cutting. I mean, whatever happens, if you look at climate change, it will have an impact on your biodiversity. When you look at chemicals and waste, it will affect your land, your soil, it will affect human. So they're all interrelated and interconnected, but we haven't, at the national level, haven't been able to implement the convention the MEAs in a more strategic way, and we're trying to get that, to be able to do that. So we set up a committee that will consist of all the MEA focal points, and start planning out how exactly or what exactly we need to do for biodiversity, and what we do for biodiversity, how that will contribute to climate change obligation, land degradation obligation, and all the other obligations under the other MEAs and vice versa. So we're hoping to get that committee going. hopefully we can continue work with what's remaining for 2020. If not, we will try our best for 2021 to try to get the work of that committee going. And I think it's important because this is where you'll be able to have to create synergies, and everybody's not doing their own thing. I'm aware with what's going on with biodiversity. I'm aware with the other MEAs, and to have a better a greater impact with our implementation.
Okay, great. Now, thank you both for being here and joining us, and thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge and information with not only myself, but with all our listeners out there. And thank you for spending your time with us. Again, this has been The Environment Matters, and we would have been talking about multilateral environmental agreements. So if you want more information, please, again, do check us out on our social media platforms. That's on Facebook and Instagram. You can check out our website. That's www.epaguyana.org. I'm sorry. And feel free to call us. We have our central office, which is in Ganges Street, Sophia, or you can check us out in Linden and also in Berbice. I have been your moderator for today, Ladonna Kissoon, bidding you a safe rest of your 2020 year. It's so, surprising that the year is almost finished. So do remember, Guyana, stay safe and just continue to protect yourself and in large, protect your family. Thank you so much for joining us.
Gosh, morning, Miss Cheryl. I'm late for work. I noticed the other day y'all had a big campaign with them police officers, so shutting down them people barbecue, wedding, dance. Man, how y'all expect these people to make money and survive?
Oh, Miss Cheryl, that is far from the truth. The EPA and the Guyana Police Force are actually working together to ensure that persons who conduct certain businesses and activities are authorized. We've tried to allow them to adhere to the noise regulations.
Well, this gotta be a new law. What law is this?
These laws were always in place. It's now that we're getting all these complaints at the agency, we are trying to enforce them. The Environmental Protection Act has been in place since 1996, and it states that persons and businesses must apply for environmental authorization before operating a sound-making device.
Well, girl, I never know this thing is prior to the law.
So if you're keeping a barbecue or an open-air function, like a wedding or a concert, especially in your community, right, and you're playing a music system, you have to apply for a short-term noise permit. And for persons that operate in a business and you got generators and stuff, you have to apply for a long-term permit. And that is applicable to bars and hotspots and clubs also.
Well, now that you explain it, I understand it. It's unfair to the elderly, sick people, and even them little children.
That is correct. According to the World Health Organization, loud noise can cause stress, sleep deprivation, and hearing impairment. And I'm sure you wouldn't want that.
Oh, now I understand. Thank you for explaining it, Miss Sonia.
For more information, you can contact the EPA at 225-5471 or visit our office at Ganges Street, North Sophia, Georgetown.
At the Environmental Protection Agency, we believe that the environment is everybody's business. We can start caring for our planet by becoming more environmentally friendly in our everyday actions. Here's what you can do: dispose of waste in a garbage bin, clean our drains, yards, and carpets regularly, take a reusable shopping bag to the market, support local butchers and farmers to reduce packaged waste, plant a kitchen garden, trees and flowers, compost your organic waste, conserve water and electricity, carry a reusable water bottle. These little acts are good for your health and that of the environment. Remember, healthy people work better and achieve more, and together, small actions make a big difference. For further information on how you can help, please contact the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, Ganges Street, Sophia, or telephone us at 225-5467. You can also visit our website, epaguyana.org, or our Facebook and Instagram pages.
Can you come around, please?
Morning. My name is Deborah. I just want to get some information.
Good morning. I am Odessa Duncan, Senior Environmental Officer. How may I assist you today?
Tell me something. They got this man next door by me breaking on this big building, and it's bare asbestos in the roof. I could remember hearing on your TV program that asbestos is dangerous to human health and the environment.
This is correct. The Environmental Protection Act states that any person or facility that is storing, treating, transporting, and or disposing of hazardous waste material must be authorized by the EPA to do so.
Oh, but it's now I'm really hearing about this hazardous waste thing. Tell me something more.
Hazardous waste are waste material with properties that are dangerous or capable of having a harmful effect on human health and the environment, including things like paint, fertilizers, and pesticides, waste oil, and asbestos. These things have the potential to cause cancer, birth defects, kidney failure, and reproductive impairment, with children being at the highest risk. The environmental authorization in this case gives the legal right to transport, store, and dispose of this material in accordance with the EP Act Chapter 2005 Laws of Guyana. Now, this ensures you and your operation and your process is safe for the environment and human health.
So you mean to tell me that all them leftover Christmas paint that I got on in my kitchen sink, I need authorization from EPA to get rid of it?
No, Miss Deborah. These items, once used for household purposes, does not require environmental authorization from the EPA. However, you should still take necessary steps to ensure that these materials are stored and disposed of in an environmentally safe manner.
Thank you so much for the information. I go in and tell him that he needs an environmental authorization. Thank you.